What happens when a billionaire's perfect life unravels in the blink of an eye? Ethan Kingsley's affair with his maid ignites a scandal that could destroy everything he's ever known. With his marriage hanging by a thread and a vengeful wife threatening his empire, Ethan must make an impossible choice: fight for the love he's found or protect the life he's built. As the consequences of his actions spiral out of control, will Ethan's desire for peace be enough to save him, or will the wreckage of his decisions consume him forever? If you're hooked by Ethan's dramatic journey of betrayal, love, and redemption, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more twists and turns in this gripping tale. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. This story is just getting started. Ethan Kingsley had it all: a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, an empire that spanned industries, and a reputation that could make or break anyone who crossed his path. As the CEO of Kingsley Enterprises, he was a man of wealth and power, the kind of person everyone respected and many envied. But beneath the polished exterior of success, Ethan's personal life was far less glamorous. His marriage to Victoria Kingsley, a renowned socialite, was little more than a contract of convenience. Their connection had long since faded, leaving them as little more than roommates bound by the public eye. Victoria, with her perfectly curated image, was more interested in hosting extravagant parties and maintaining her status than in nurturing her marriage. The two had been living separate lives under the same roof for years, their interactions mostly limited to formalities or the occasional strained dinner conversation. Despite the outward appearances, the Kingsleys were two people trapped in a loveless union, playing a game for the world to see. Enter Lily. She was young, ambitious, and determined to build a life far better than the one she had. Growing up in a small town with little to offer, Lily had come to the city with dreams of independence. Her job as a maid in the Kingsley household was her first big step toward a better future, and she worked tirelessly, determined to prove herself. She was sharp, efficient, and always on time, a stark contrast to the indifferent luxury she served in. Ethan noticed her almost immediately. It wasn't just her work ethic that caught his eye, but the quiet grace with which she moved through his life. Lily never spoke much, but there was something about her presence, her kindness, her genuine smile, the way she looked at the world as though she still had hope, that struck a chord deep within him. Her youthful energy was a stark contrast to his weary, jaded soul. For Lily, Ethan was everything she had ever imagined a man of power to be: confident, authoritative, and enigmatic. She had heard whispers of his success and saw the respect he commanded, but it wasn't until she worked in his household that she truly understood the gravity of his influence. Despite the difference in their worlds, Lily found herself admiring Ethan. She couldn't help but notice the way his gaze lingered on her during the rare moments they interacted. But she always brushed off the thought, reminding herself that she was just an employee, nothing more. It wasn't long before their unspoken connection became a silent undercurrent in the house. At first, it was innocent, a smile exchanged over coffee in the kitchen or the occasional glance when their paths crossed. But soon, the tension between them grew palpable. There was an invisible thread that seemed to pull them closer, though neither dared to acknowledge it aloud. Ethan, for the first time in years, felt alive in a way he hadn't in his marriage. His relationship with Victoria had long since turned stale, and the constant superficiality of their interactions had left him hollow. Lily, with her untainted spirit and genuine warmth, made him feel something real, something that he hadn't even realized he had been missing. For Lily, the attraction was equally undeniable, but she knew better than to entertain such thoughts. She was the maid, and Ethan Kingsley was her employer, a man who could have anyone he wanted. She told herself that it was foolish to think of him beyond the boundaries of their roles. After all, she had come here to work, not to fall for someone who could never see her as an equal. But as the days passed, the tension between them grew. There were moments when their eyes would meet, and the silence would stretch longer than it should. The smallest touch, her brushing past him while handing him his coffee, or him reaching for a book she was holding, seemed to carry a spark neither could ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan was sitting in his study reviewing reports. Lily had finished her chores for the day and was heading to her small quarters near the back of the house. The air between them was thick with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Ethan called her name, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Lily, can you come here for a moment?" She turned, her heart racing, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected the request, but somehow the words still caught her off guard. She walked toward him slowly, unsure of what this moment would bring. The distance between them felt small, as though the space that separated them had somehow collapsed into a moment of uncertainty. "Is everything all right?" Lily asked softly, standing a few feet away from his desk. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of their emotions. Then, without thinking, he stood up. The tension was unbearable, and as he reached out, it was as if some invisible force had taken control of their actions. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. It was a kiss that neither of them had expected, nor was it one they could undo. Time seemed to freeze as the world outside the study disappeared. The kiss was filled with everything they had held back: desire, guilt, and the raw, unspoken need to feel something real. Lily froze for a moment, her mind racing, but then, as if instinctively, she kissed him back. In that single, fateful kiss, they crossed a line they could never uncross. The forbidden bond was formed, not just in the stolen moment of intimacy, but in the realization that they had opened a door that could never be shut again. Neither of them spoke after the kiss. They stood there, breathless, each trapped in the knowledge of what had just happened. There was no going back. But as the night stretched on, the weight of the moment settled in, and they both knew their lives had just changed in ways they couldn't yet understand. The morning after the night that changed everything, Ethan Kingsley awoke in his luxurious bed. The sheets tangled around him like a shroud. The quiet hum of the estate, usually a backdrop to his life, seemed deafening now. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the room, but the warmth of the day couldn't reach him. His mind was clouded, replaying the events of last night, of that kiss, of the way his body had betrayed the very vows he had long since stopped caring about. But Ethan did what he always did when things went awry. He buried it. He had worked hard for his empire, for the success that allowed him to live a life of luxury, and he couldn't let some momentary lapse in judgment ruin it. So he focused on what he knew best: business. The weight of the decision would wait. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters, Lily was a mess. The events of the night before played out like a forbidden dream, each memory more vivid than the last. She had kissed Ethan Kingsley, the man she'd admired from afar, and it had felt both thrilling and terrifying. But guilt gnawed at her. What was she now? What had she done? As the days passed, it became clear that their night together was more than just a fleeting encounter. It was a mistake that had far-reaching consequences. Lily felt it in the way Ethan avoided her. He kept his distance, a cold professionalism in every interaction, as if the night had never happened. Yet, his eyes, when they lingered on her for just a moment too long, betrayed him. They were both trapped by the same unspoken truth. Lily's morning sickness was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. She tried to ignore it at first, thinking it was a passing illness, a coincidence. But the nausea only grew worse. She knew, deep down, that she had crossed a line that was now impossibly blurred, and her body was betraying her in the most visible way possible. It wasn't until she missed her period that she faced the truth. She was pregnant, Ethan's child. The child that would tie them together forever in a scandal no one could ignore. The first few weeks were a blur of fear and confusion. Lily debated whether to tell Ethan, but how could she? He had barely acknowledged her since that night. The thought of confessing made her stomach turn with dread. She could already imagine his reaction: horror, anger, maybe even dismissal. And what of Victoria? The woman who had been so oblivious to the cracks in her marriage. Would she ever forgive Lily? Would she forgive Ethan? The subtle signs were beginning to show, though. Ethan's usual indifference to his wife, Victoria, seemed to shift. He'd become more distracted, often lost in thought during their dinner conversations, his gaze occasionally drifting toward the corner of the room where Lily might be cleaning. A fleeting expression, a quick glance. These small changes didn't go unnoticed by Victoria. At first, she chalked it up to stress. Ethan had been working late, overseeing major business deals, and she had her own social circle to maintain. But then the cracks began to show more clearly. His moods were unpredictable. One moment distant, the next, too close, as if he were trying to make up for something. He would retreat into his office for hours, his phone constantly buzzing with messages that he would never share. It was a subtle change, but enough to unsettle Victoria. She began to notice Lily more often, too. The young maid had always been quiet and efficient, but now there was something different about her. Her demeanor seemed to carry a weight, a sadness in her eyes that had not been there before. And the way Ethan looked at her, the way his eyes softened just for a moment when their gazes met, it was all too much for Victoria to ignore. She had been blindsided by many things in her marriage, but this felt like a betrayal she couldn't overlook. Victoria knew Ethan better than anyone. She had seen his weaknesses and his strengths, his charm, and his dark sides. But this felt like something personal, something deeper. And though she couldn't quite place her finger on it, she knew something had changed. One evening, as the house was bathed in the soft glow of evening lights, Victoria decided to confront her husband. She walked into his study, where he was again buried in paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration. His usual cool demeanor didn't mask the tension in the room. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady but edged with a cool undertone. He looked up from his papers, his expression guarded. "Victoria, what's on your mind?" She closed the door behind her, taking a slow step forward. "I've been noticing some things. Your behavior, it's been different lately. I don't know what's going on, but I need to know the truth. You've been distracted, distant. Something's off." Ethan swallowed, trying to keep his composure, but he could feel the walls closing in. He had always prided himself on controlling the narrative of his life. But now, it felt like he was teetering on the edge of losing it all. "I'm just stressed. That's all," he said, offering the most plausible excuse he could muster. But even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. Victoria stared at him, not buying his words for a second. "Stressed? Or is it something else? Are you having an affair, Ethan? Is that why you're acting like this?" The word affair hung in the air like a heavy weight. Ethan's face paled, and for a split second he saw the question in her eyes, the suspicion, the doubt. But instead of confessing, instead of coming clean, he clamped his lips shut, unwilling to admit anything. "I told you. It's nothing," he muttered, his voice strained. "I'm just tired. It's been a long week." Victoria wasn't convinced, but she also knew better than to push too hard. She could sense that there was something more. But what could she do? She had no proof, only feelings, only intuition. And as she turned to leave, the tension between them felt like a silent storm waiting to break. But what neither of them knew was that the storm was already brewing. In the quiet of her small room, Lily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Her pregnancy was no longer something she could hide, and soon the truth would come crashing down. The power dynamics in the house were shifting. and the consequences of her actions were beginning to unfold, not just for her, but for Ethan, Victoria, and the life they had built together. The days after Ethan's subtle shift in behavior grew into weeks, and with each passing day, the weight of suspicion on Victoria's shoulders grew heavier. She could feel it, the distance, the coldness between them, the unspoken truths that lingered in the air. Ethan had been acting more erratically than usual, distracted at dinner, quick to anger, and more withdrawn into his work. The small details she had once overlooked, his late-night business meetings, the nervous glances exchanged between him and Lily, were now impossible to ignore. Victoria was no fool. She had built her life around appearances, yes, but she wasn't blind to the subtle shifts in her marriage. A part of her knew something was wrong, and as her suspicions grew, so did her need for answers. The guilt gnawed at her every time she saw Lily pass by with that faraway look in her eyes, the same expression Ethan often wore, distant and troubled. One evening, when the house was quiet and the staff had retreated to their quarters, Victoria decided to act. Ethan had retreated to his study, as he often did in the late hours, and Lily had just finished her duties for the night. She caught Lily on her way to the servants' quarters, her usually cheerful face now clouded with a mix of exhaustion and unease. "Lily!" "A moment!" Victoria called sharply. Lily froze for a second, then turned slowly, her eyes widening slightly as she approached her employer. The tension between them had been growing, but the awkward silence was always broken by Victoria's demands, never a true conversation. Victoria studied the younger woman for a moment, her gaze lingering a little longer than usual. "Is everything all right, Lily?" she asked, her voice almost too calm. "You've been acting different. Is there something you're not telling me?" Lily felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She had to be careful. The last thing she wanted was to spark Victoria's suspicions further. But the sharpness in her voice made it clear there was no avoiding the conversation. "I'm fine, Mrs. Kingsley," Lily said, her voice steady but strained. She tried to smile, but it faltered. Victoria wasn't convinced. "You've been spending a lot of time in the kitchen, working late, looking over your shoulder. And then there's your face, Lily. I see the signs. You're hiding something." Lily took a deep breath, her heart racing. She knew there was no turning back now. She couldn't keep the truth from Victoria forever, and part of her knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to light. But how could she say it? How could she explain what had happened between her and Ethan? How could she confess that the very thing Victoria feared had already occurred? But before Lily could find the words, Victoria stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "I've been watching you closely, and I know something is wrong. Are you involved with Ethan?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Lily's throat tightened, her pulse quickening. She felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave the house, to disappear before the truth came out. But she couldn't. She had already made the choice, and now, it seemed, there was no escaping it. Before she could respond, Victoria's eyes narrowed with understanding, and she reached for Lily's hand. "Tell me the truth, Lily. You're pregnant, aren't you?" The words stung, and Lily felt her world collapse in on itself. She wanted to deny it, wanted to say that Victoria was wrong, that she didn't know what she was talking about. But the guilt was written all over her face. She nodded, barely able to keep her composure. "Yes, Mrs. Kingsley, I am." Her voice was barely a whisper. Victoria's face turned pale. She staggered backward as though she had been struck. The silence between them was suffocating. Victoria took a shaky breath, her hand instinctively reaching for the edge of a nearby table to steady herself. She had known something was off, but hearing it confirmed, hearing Lily admit it, was more than she could bear. With trembling hands, Victoria turned and left the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to confront Ethan, now. Ethan was sitting in his study, papers spread out in front of him, when Victoria stormed in, her eyes blazing with fury. Her face was pale, and her jaw was clenched so tightly that Ethan thought she might break her teeth. "Ethan!" she snapped, her voice cold with disbelief. "I know." He stood up, caught off guard by the intensity of her presence. "What are you talking about?" "I know about Lily. I know about you," she hissed. "You think I didn't see it? You think I didn't notice the way you've been acting? The way you look at her?" Her voice trembled with a mixture of rage and hurt. "You've betrayed me in the most humiliating, scandalous way possible." Ethan froze, his heart sinking. He had prepared himself for this confrontation, but nothing could have prepared him for the intensity of Victoria's fury. His mind raced. He had to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. "I never meant for this to happen," he stammered, his voice strained. He wanted to explain, to make her understand. But how could he? How could he justify his actions when they had already torn apart everything he had worked for? Victoria shook her head, her eyes blazing with anger. "You've made a fool of me, Ethan. We are a joke. I'm married to a man who can't keep his hands off the help. What do you think people will say when they find out? You've ruined me! You've ruined us!" Her voice cracked with emotion, and Ethan could see the depth of her pain. He had never seen her so vulnerable, so exposed. It was clear now that he was losing her. "Victoria, please," he said, his voice a desperate whisper. "I never wanted any of this. No," she interrupted, her voice hardening again. "Don't you dare try to make me feel sorry for you. This isn't about your mistakes, Ethan. It's about the scandal. It's about how this will look to everyone." Her words struck him like a blow, and for a moment, Ethan felt the weight of it all. The destruction of his marriage, the inevitable fallout. He had been so caught up in the affair with Lily that he had never considered the true cost, what it would mean for his reputation, for everything he had built. The confrontation with Victoria was only the beginning. As the days passed, the world Ethan had known began to crumble. Gossip spread like wildfire, and the public was quick to turn on the Kingsleys. Victoria, unable to hold on to her public image any longer, became cold, calculating, and vengeful. She decided that no one would think she was the one at fault. The scandal would be Ethan's burden, and she would hold him responsible for the destruction of their perfect life. Lily, caught in the middle of it all, became the scapegoat for both of them. She had never asked for any of this. She was just a woman who had made a mistake that now threatened to ruin everything. But as the truth came crashing down, one thing became clear. Ethan's world was falling apart, and no amount of money or power could save him from the consequences of his actions. The moment the news of Ethan Kingsley's scandal broke, the world he had carefully crafted began to crumble. The headlines were unforgiving. Billionaire CEO's secret affair with maid leads to pregnancy scandal. Every media outlet picked up the story, plastering Ethan's face, his family's name, and Lily's innocent visage across every screen and page. The shockwaves rippled through the business world, the social elite, and the public at large, creating an irreparable fracture in Ethan's once immaculate reputation. His name, once synonymous with power and success, was now a symbol of disgrace. Ethan sat in his office, his usually immaculate demeanor replaced by a hollow, distant look. The phone rang incessantly, each call a reminder that his life had just spiraled into chaos. Press conferences had been scheduled, legal teams were assembling to deal with the fallout, and social media exploded with the kind of hate and vitriol that only a scandal of this magnitude could generate. He was being torn apart by the same people who once admired him. His wealth, his status, none of it mattered now. He was just another man caught in a scandal, no different from the many others whose lives had been dragged through the mud. Victoria, however, was in a different place. Where Ethan felt powerless to stop the storm, Victoria used the public spectacle to her advantage. As the wife scorned, she became the face of righteous indignation, placing the blame squarely on Ethan. She withdrew from the press, appearing at social events with a composed, carefully constructed smile. But behind closed doors, she seethed with fury. Every time Ethan tried to approach her, to explain himself, she would dismiss him with a cold, cutting remark. Her primary concern wasn't the marriage anymore. It was the damage to her status and what others would think. She had always been concerned with the perception of perfection, and now, with this scandal, she was determined to make sure everyone knew that Ethan was the villain in their marriage. "I want her gone." "Now," Victoria said sharply, standing in the lavish hallway of their home, her gaze cold and unwavering. Ethan, who had just come from yet another tense meeting with his lawyers, stopped in his tracks. He had expected this, Victoria's rage, her need for control, but hearing her say it aloud, her words so final, felt like another blow to his chest. "Lily has done nothing wrong," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "She's just a part of this, like me. I'm the one who made the mistake." Victoria's eyes narrowed, and she took a step closer, her heels clicking menacingly on the marble floor. "No, she has done something wrong. She's the one who's pregnant with your child, Ethan. And I won't have her in my house any longer. Not while I'm trying to salvage my reputation." Ethan's heart ached, the weight of his actions heavy in his chest. He understood Victoria's anger. He was the one who had let this happen. But the coldness in her voice, the bitterness that had taken root in their marriage, was too much to bear. "Where will she go?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking. "Lily doesn't have anyone here. She came to this city to escape a past she didn't want." Victoria's lips curled into a tight smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "That's her problem, Ethan, not mine. She can leave as quickly as she came." Ethan nodded slowly, resigned to the fact that he had no power here. Victoria had made her decision long before he could offer any alternatives. He couldn't protect Lily from the wrath of his wife. And now, even his attempts to protect his own marriage seemed futile. He was lost in a sea of guilt and the overwhelming desire to make everything right. But he couldn't fix this with money or power. He couldn't fix it at all. Later that evening, Lily sat in her small room, the quiet of the house oppressive. The weight of the world felt heavier than ever. She had known the consequences of her actions, had been prepared for the fallout, but nothing had prepared her for the way she felt now. Lost, hopeless, caught between two worlds. Her heart was torn. She loved Ethan. She couldn't deny it anymore, no matter how reckless it had been, no matter how much she tried to rationalize it away. Ethan was a man of power, yes, but he was also someone who had made her feel seen, someone who had shared moments with her that no one else had ever given her. But what did that matter now? He was trapped in a marriage that was unraveling, and she was just a part of the destruction. Her hand rested on her stomach, her growing pregnancy a reminder of what was at stake. She wasn't sure what the right choice was anymore. Leave the house as Victoria demanded, or stay and face the wrath of a family that wanted nothing more than to erase her from their lives. The idea of leaving terrified her. She had nothing to go back to. Her family was miles away, and she had come to the city to escape a life of struggle. But if she stayed, she would only continue to be a pawn in a game of power and guilt, caught between the expectations of a family that resented her and the man who had put her in this position. That night, Ethan came to her door, his knock soft but urgent. When she opened it, his presence, the familiar warmth of his figure, filled the room. He looked at her with a mixture of regret and desperation, the guilt etched on his face. "We need to talk," he said, his voice quiet. Lily stepped aside, allowing him into the room. She had expected him to come, but now that he was here, the reality of their situation hit her all over again. There was no easy way out of this, no way to erase what had happened between them. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said. his voice breaking. "I should have protected you. I should have made sure you weren't caught in the crossfire." Lily shook her head, her heart aching for the man she had once trusted completely. "You don't need to apologize, Ethan. You didn't ask for this any more than I did." She paused, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. "But what now? What happens to me? What happens to us?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Victoria wants you gone. She's made it clear. She says it's the only way to protect her reputation." Lily's chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. She had feared this. She had known it would come to this. "You don't have to leave, Lily," Ethan said, taking a step forward, his eyes pleading with her. "Stay. I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out." But Lily's heart told her a different story. She knew the truth. Ethan was trapped in a life that he had chosen long before she had entered it. A life he couldn't simply walk away from. He was a prisoner of his own choices, just like she was. And while she had once believed they could build something together, the reality of their situation had become too clear. "No, Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You need to fix things with your wife. You need to fix your marriage. You've got a life to protect. And I have to figure out mine." Ethan's face fell, but he nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The silence between them grew, thick with the unspoken truth that neither of them could change what had already happened. And so, as the fallout of the scandal continued to unfold, the story of Ethan, Lily, and Victoria took its inevitable course. Ethan was forced to face the consequences of his actions, publicly, professionally, and personally. But for Lily, the hardest choice was yet to come. Leave the man she loved and the life she thought she wanted, or stay and face a future filled with uncertainty. The air in the Kingsley estate had never felt so heavy. What once was a sanctuary of wealth and luxury now felt like a prison to Ethan. The walls, gilded in opulence, felt like they were closing in on him, the weight of his decisions pressing down on his chest. His marriage to Victoria, once a picture of perfection, was unraveling in ways he couldn't have predicted. The tension between them was palpable, like walking on broken glass, every word, every look. An open wound. Ethan sat in his office, the city's skyline stretching before him, but he couldn't focus on the view. He had made his fortune in business, yet here, in the most important aspects of his life, he was failing. The scandal was still fresh, the whispers behind his back growing louder, and the public backlash only intensified as time passed. But what troubled him the most wasn't the media frenzy. It was the growing realization that the life he had once believed in was no longer what he wanted. Victoria had become a shadow of the woman he had married. Her anger, her resentment, had taken root so deep that nothing could penetrate it. The love that had once existed between them had withered, replaced by manipulation and constant threats. She demanded more, pushed him further into corners, always reminding him of his failures. And no matter how many times he tried to fix it, it wasn't enough. But then there was Lily. Ethan had tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as a mistake, something that could be buried in the past. But the more he thought about her, the more he realized that his feelings for her weren't fleeting. The connection they shared had become undeniable. Lily wasn't just the maid anymore. She had become someone he could see a future with, someone who had shown him the kind of love he hadn't felt in years. Late one night, when the house was silent and the world seemed to sleep, Ethan found himself standing outside Lily's door. He had come to a decision, one that both terrified him and gave him a strange sense of clarity. He couldn't keep pretending that his life was still under control. He couldn't keep hiding from what he truly wanted. He knocked softly. A moment later, the door creaked open, and Lily stood before him, her face a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. Her eyes were tired, but there was a softness in them when she looked at him, a tenderness that made his heart ache. "Lily," Ethan began, his voice low and serious, "we need to talk. Lily stepped back, allowing him to enter. She wasn't sure what he was going to say, but she could feel the weight of his presence in the room. Every step he took toward her seemed to make the distance between them both more and more real. "What's going on, Ethan?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He let out a deep breath, standing before her as if he were a man who had come to face his own reckoning. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us, about what happened." His eyes locked onto hers, intense and filled with emotion. "This isn't just a mistake for me, Lily. What we have, it's more than just an affair. I can't ignore it anymore. I don't want to ignore it. I want you in my life. I need you in my life." The words hung in the air, the silence thick between them. Lily's heart raced. She had never imagined this moment. Yes, she had hoped, deep down, that Ethan would come to this realization, that they would have a future together. But could she truly believe it? Could she trust him when everything in his life seemed to be falling apart? "I don't know if I can do this, Ethan," she said quietly, her voice trembling with the vulnerability that had always been hidden beneath her resolve. "You're married. You have a family. You have a life I can never be a part of. I can't live in the shadows anymore." Ethan took a step closer, his hand gently cupping her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "I'm asking you to be part of my life, Lily. Not just as the woman I've had an affair with, but as someone I want a future with. I know it's complicated, but I'm willing to fight for you. I'm willing to choose you." Lily's breath hitched. "But you have to choose, Ethan. You can't keep straddling two worlds. You need to decide what you really want." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of her words hitting him harder than any business deal or media scandal ever could. He had spent so many years building his empire, thinking that he could have it all, thinking that he could balance his marriage, his reputation, and his desires without consequence. But now he saw the truth. He couldn't have everything. He had to choose, and the decision would change everything. Before he could respond, the door to Lily's room opened suddenly, and there stood Victoria. Her eyes were filled with fury, and her voice dripped with venom. "So this is what it's come to?" she spat, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "You're throwing away everything for her? For the maid?" Lily took a step back, her chest tightening. Ethan's eyes flicked between the two women, his mind racing. Victoria's presence in the doorway was a reminder of everything he had to lose. His wife, his reputation, his wealth, his status. Victoria's expression was filled with disdain, her anger clearly written on her face. "You're pathetic, Ethan. I don't care what you do with her, but if you don't fix this marriage, if you don't fix the mess you've created, I will make sure you regret it. You'll lose everything. Do you hear me?" Ethan's heart clenched. He could feel the pressure building, the weight of the choices pressing down on him. Victoria was no longer the woman he had married. She was a force of destruction, a person willing to destroy everything for the sake of her pride. But Lily was different. She was the only person who made him feel like he mattered, who made him feel like there was a future worth fighting for. "I'm done, Victoria," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "I can't keep pretending. I can't keep living a lie." Victoria's face contorted with disbelief. "You're making a huge mistake, Ethan. Don't you dare think that you can just walk away from me, from everything we built." "You'll regret this," but Ethan was resolute. "I have to live with my choices. And right now, the only person I want in my life is Lily." The words were final. He had made his decision. Victoria turned on her heel, her face a mask of fury, and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing in the silence. Ethan turned back to Lily, his eyes softening. "I've made my choice, Lily. It's you." Tears welled in Lily's eyes, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The quiet acknowledgement between them was all that was necessary. Ethan had chosen her, and for the first time, despite the uncertainty that still loomed, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there could be a future for them after all. The fallout of the scandal had rippled across every corner of Ethan Kingsley's life, transforming him from a man of wealth and influence into someone grappling with the consequences of his actions. The world, once at his fingertips, now felt distant, like a fading memory he could no longer grasp. Every part of his life, the empire he had built, the perfect marriage, the illusion of control, had shattered into irreparable pieces. Ethan had made his choice. He had chosen Lily. And while that decision had brought him a sense of clarity and peace, it had also forced him to step away from everything he had known, everything he had worked so hard to protect. The legal battles were intense, the media relentless, but Ethan's heart was no longer in the fight. His reputation, once pristine, was in tatters. The empire he had spent decades building now seemed irrelevant in the face of the turmoil that consumed him. In the weeks following his decision to leave Victoria, Ethan found solace in the quiet moments spent with Lily. For the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe. Their connection, once born from a mistake, had transformed into something far more profound, a bond he knew was genuine. But even in this newfound peace, he couldn't escape the weight of what he had done, and the consequences he had yet to face. Lily, too, found herself caught between the relief of Ethan's choice and the looming uncertainty of their future. She loved him. She couldn't deny it. But she also knew that their path forward would be anything but easy. She had seen the destruction caused by the scandal, had witnessed the backlash from both the public and Victoria, who was now using her anger and pride as weapons to dismantle Ethan's life piece by piece. Lily often found herself asking if the love they shared would be enough to overcome the world that was now so determined to tear them apart. Meanwhile, Victoria's fury only deepened. Her pride, her public image, and the years she had invested in the Kingsley name had been destroyed by the affair. And while Ethan had made his choice, she had no intention of letting him walk away without feeling the full force of her vengeance. The bitterness in her heart burned hotter with each passing day. She began to manipulate the situation, using every weapon at her disposal: money, influence, and power, to make Ethan's life a living nightmare. Victoria filed for a public divorce, demanding not only a hefty settlement, but also the control of Kingsley Enterprises. She knew that taking away Ethan's livelihood would be the ultimate form of punishment, the final blow to his carefully curated world. But even beyond the financial retribution, Victoria sought to humiliate him. She spread rumors, orchestrated smear campaigns, and made sure every tabloid had a story about his betrayal. She wanted him to regret his decision, to see the extent of the destruction he had caused. As the legal battles intensified, Ethan found himself facing not only his ex-wife's wrath, but the moral repercussions of his choices. He had left behind a world of luxury and power, but it had come at a cost: his business, his status, and his reputation. He had betrayed not just Victoria, but the very ideals he had built his life on: control, success, and stability. The guilt that weighed on him wasn't just about the affair. It was about how he had sacrificed everything he once held dear for something that had yet to prove its worth. Still, Ethan found peace in Lily. In her, he saw hope, a chance to rebuild, to heal from the wounds of the past. Together, they navigated the uncertainty of their new life, determined to create something meaningful amidst the wreckage. Ethan was no longer the billionaire businessman who could bend the world to his will. He was just a man trying to make things right, trying to rebuild a life of honesty and love. But as the legal and personal battles raged on, Ethan began to see that peace wasn't something that could be found through victory or through escaping the consequences of his actions. It had to come from within. It had to come from acknowledging his mistakes and accepting that no matter how much he wanted to undo the damage, he couldn't. The world had changed, and so had he. One evening, as he sat in the small apartment he now shared with Lily, watching the sun set through the window, Ethan couldn't help but reflect on everything he had lost and everything he had gained. The life he had lived before was gone. The mansion, the wealth, the empire. But he had something now he hadn't truly known before. Authenticity. He had a woman who loved him not for his name or his money, but for who he truly was, flaws and all. Yet, even in this moment of introspection, he couldn't escape the realization that Lily, too, was paying a price. She had become the target of the same public scorn that had been aimed at him. Her life had been forever altered by their affair, by the scandal that had rocked their world. While Ethan had chosen her, he couldn't ignore that she, too, had to live with the consequences. And then there was Victoria. Ethan had underestimated the depth of her anger, her need for control. In her desire for revenge, she had managed to destroy the remnants of their marriage and had taken every opportunity to ensure Ethan would never forget the price of his betrayal. He could see the lengths she would go to for power, to ensure that she remained on top. But the more Ethan reflected on their marriage, the more he realized that what they had was not love. It was a partnership built on convenience, status, and appearances. Victoria had never truly loved him, and in her destruction, she had only revealed her true self. The story of Ethan, Victoria, and Lily was now one of transformation, a tale of choices made and consequences lived. Ethan had to come to terms with the fact that no matter how much he wished he could go back, the damage was done. He couldn't change the past, but he could choose how he moved forward. As the months passed, Ethan and Lily continued to build their life together, far removed from the world of public scrutiny and corporate warfare. It wasn't easy, but there was a quiet peace between them, a love that had survived the storm. They had learned to find meaning in the small moments, the quiet mornings, the shared dreams, the promises of a future untethered from the expectations of the past. As for Victoria, she continued her life in the shadows, her bitterness and thirst for power never fully quenched. She had won her battles, but in the end, she had lost what mattered most: the truth of who she was and the love she had never truly fought for. The story ended not with a final victory, but with the realization that sometimes the greatest battles we fight are not with the world around us, but with ourselves. And in the end, it was the choices we make and the peace we find within them that shape the course of our lives.